today. A few more of us will just be joining as they come along. But today we're covering off essentially just event sustainability 101. It's a massive topic. Sustainability itself is a massive topic. And there's a lot for us to cover off today, which is why we just wanted to take a bit more of a broader approach, the basics, the future. And there's people from all different types of event companies working all different sides of events, whether it's in corporate or whether it's for an actual facilitators. And there's a lot of ways to capitalize or to incorporate or to bring this in. So we're going to be going across the whole space pretty quickly in about 35 to 40 minutes with some questions. So please feel free, if you want us to go into anything in more depth at the end, to just reach out. But today is very much about an introduction to sustainability in the events industry. We're going to be introducing our guest speaker, Craig, who I'll let you all know a little bit more about in a second. Then there's the event sustainability planning, very big part of hosting and incorporating sustainability into an event is in the upfront aspect of it. It's very hard to do it retrospectively. So we'll go into what that looks like. And then really looking at some of the big emission sources for events, like green event venues, sustainable transportation, energy conservation, and then finally how to run a sustainable event. And Afonso, one of our co-founders, will be taking that second half of the webinar, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. So just quickly, just to touch on event sustainability as a whole, you'd have to have your head in the sand, so to speak, to not notice that this is really where the industry is heading, and it's got to be the biggest trend affecting the industry at the moment. Major players are already very much investing a lot of time and a lot of money into their credentials, into how they're stacking up and being perceived as green. So a big part of the pitch that Paris Olympics put in to be awarded for the 2024 was to be the greenest games ever. And you look at these other major events across the world now, your NHLs, your FIFAs, your Formula Ones, they're all promising carbon neutrality. The validity of their carbon neutrality is another question, but it is something they're hanging their hats on. And it is because it is, and as we'll touch on in the next slide, a very carbon intensive activity. Studies recently out of the University of Freiburg point that each attendee at a 3-day conference will emit 0.5 to 1.5 tons. And to put that into context, to be in line with the Paris 1.5 degree target, each person can only emit about 2.5 tons of CO2 per year. So it's quite a huge amount when you consider some of these massive conferences and the travel and the production, the materials that are going into them. And in saying that, event emissions are as high, the estimates as high as 10% of the global total. So, think about all of these massive events where we're building stadiums, even people are flying all over the world, thinking like a Taylor Swift global tour, but this is happening on a massive scale. And there is so many different event types, from conferences to activations, parties, festivals, and things like that. And the reason it is poised for rapid growth, the sustainability space, is that it is such a high visibility voluntary activity. You don't have to have an in-person event. Now it's been shown and proven to be able to do it online, to be able to take it away from this really carbon intensive activity. And as such, as there is more pressure on corporates and individuals to have a smaller footprint, there is going to be more pressure and scrutiny as to what are you actually doing to reduce the impact of what is something that, essentially can be reduced quite easily. And we're really going to see this pressure from corporates come as greater focus is on their scope 3 emissions. And we're not going to go too much into the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions today, but it is basically just the division of carbon emissions for accepted across all frameworks. So scope 1 being the direct emissions of a business, scope 2 being the indirect, such as electricity, and scope 3, everything in the value chain. So that's where events sit under. Just recently in Australia, we've even had it announced that we're going to be bringing in our mandatory climate reporting requirements for larger companies in 2024 and beyond. So what you're going to see, and what we're already starting to see, even in the news this week from Amazon, is that there's more and more pressure on who these larger corporates are dealing with in their supply chain. So they'll want to be holding and hosting and being involved in low impact events. And it all comes into the sense that, calculation and reduction has come a long way. It was previously very expensive, very time consuming to even calculate what the impact of a single event was. And this calculation reduction was just left more towards a business for a whole year per se. But now it's something that's very, very accessible for even our smaller, 1 to 10 sized companies who want to be doing analysis or providing that insight. And just finally, just to kind of speak broadly to the topic, this is an area that NetNata is very interested in. So NetNata, again, for those who may just be coming or interacting with us for the first time, is a climate tech software company that specializes in the calculation, reduction, certification of carbon emissions in areas such as that. But the event space is one that we're really looking in, and it's an area that we're having a lot of experience and really enjoying, from the music industry to recently doing Robbie Williams International Tour, Laneway Festival, Lime Cordiales Australian Tour, to sport. We did Super Rugby Round, all the analysis, the reduction strategies, even the offsetting down at Amy Park this year. And then we're also partnering more on a calculation side for corporate and conferences. So we will touch on our event emissions calculator in a second, but something we're working with the Gold Coast Convention Centre to specialize for them. And then also partnering with a wide range of event companies, how we can help them analyze their own emissions, but then also those of their clients and partners. Just want to then hand it over now. We've kind of spoken broadly to our guest speaker, Craig Lovett. And Craig is the partner of Incognitus and Wise, to very strong Australian event companies with over 35 years of experience in the events industry, from Formula One to Olympics. Very excited and happy to have Craig here, and I'll hand it over to him now to speak to his experience in the events industry and the impact sustainability is having on it.
Hey, thanks, mate, and welcome everybody. Nice to be looking out wherever you're all from and talking about one of my favourite topics, the event industry. I've been involved in the event industry for about 38 years, started here in Melbourne, Australia, and grew up and down the east coast of Australia, and went over to have a little look at the preparation for Atlanta Olympic Games in 1996. Sydney had been announced as the winner in 1993 of the 2000 Olympic Games. There was a green twist and bent and focus on the games, and I went over to Atlanta. I don't even know what I went there for, really. Went to have a look about what the games were going to be about. Went over in about May, June of 1996 with the games hosted in August, September, and I left there 6 days later with a contract to manage the cleaning and waste management of the Atlanta Games. Didn't have an employee, didn't have an office, didn't even have a business registered, is how it all happened. And from there, I guess we grew around the world. We've now been involved in 9 Olympic Games and just been awarded a piece of business for Paris 24 next year, which is Chatham House rules, because I can't tell anyone yet, so I didn't tell you all today. So I guess we'll go to our 10th Olympic Games, summer and winter, 7 or 8 Commonwealth Games, 40 or 50 Formula One events across the world. Been heavily involved in Wimbledon, Australian Open, US Open, and the French Open tennis. And then great events from Super Bowls to FA Cups, Euro Cups, outstanding golf tournaments around the world. I guess you name it, we've been involved in it. And I guess all of it pretty much started where if there was anything to do with sustainability, it was about as heavy as picking up an aluminium can somewhere and make sure it went to the right bin. No one really cared about things too much. But to where it's got to now, particularly over the last decade, it's phenomenal, the focus that's coming on in the event industry. The event industry doesn't move all that fast, but when it does move, it moves together. So it takes a long time to make change, and particularly in the sustainability space, it's been very difficult. We've come up with great initiatives and great ideas and haven't necessarily been listened to a lot, but all of a sudden someone's telling us what we've been telling them for years. They go, this is a real good thing, we should do this now. And it's a bit like, was a bit like my 6 years in the Australian military. It's all about hurry up and wait. Hurry up, do this now, and then wait till we make a decision about it. But it sort of moved along a bit to a pretty good space right now. I guess one of the big things, you touched on a little bit before, but one of the big things that's sort of coming into focus now is what an artist thinks about sustainability and what an artist thinks that he or she or they want to be contracted to, related to. I recently had a look at the Coldplay contract with their riders that came out only last week for their one concert in Australia, which is in Optus Stadium in Perth. And for the first time, I've often seen, notes written or inferences about a band who'd like to see something or like to do something. But in the case of Coldplay, they now have not only a back-of-house rider, they have a front-of-house rider. So it's right outside of what they're contracted to do, get on stage and perform for 2.5 to 3 hours or whatever it might be. But their front-of-house riders are now typically all related around sustainability. They won't play in a stadium that uses a single-use plastic cup. They don't really care what the catering contract says. They really don't even care who the caterer might be, whether the event's catering in-house or it's outsourced. What they care about is what they think they control, and what they control is Chris Martin won't take stage if his front-of-house riders, in a sustainability sense, aren't actually something that his management team can look at and tick off on. I think just won't take stage. And his performance contract says he doesn't have to. If he doesn't get his front-of-house rider right, then he doesn't actually have to take stage. So increasingly, promoters and managers of major acts are now being forced to take a focus on sustainability and being forced to take on, a real focus on waste footprint and diversions from landfill and preferred packaging types and things like that. It won't be that far away before that'll be the Olympic Games that's making a statement, not just a motherhood environmental statement, but it'll be that if a country of choice that's chosen to run a games doesn't behave front of house the way that the IOC want them to behave front of house, that they won't perform. And the financial penalties, that could be massive. It's long gone from, again, recycling, diversion from landfill. It's much bigger than that now. In our Wise business, so our Wise business grew out of all of my years. If you've done any research on me before today's call, or you do it after today's call, my background started as I developed here in Victoria a cleaning company that specialised on major events and venues, and that was in 1987. As I said, we grew around the world, and I explained that before. But back then, my Achilles heel was single-use plastics. When I serviced Flemington Racecourse for 26 consecutive years, and my Achilles heel was to walk out on that lawn on Melbourne Cup night and wonder why there's 80,000 plastic cups sitting on that lawn, and I couldn't find a way to get rid of them, which is what led me into our Wise business, which is about a sustainable production of cups that are reused and rewashed up to about 500 times in venues and events around the world. And we'd taken off really well before COVID. COVID shut us down for a while. As you can imagine, this in Australia anyway, there was absolutely no activity of a need for a plastic cup like that. And coming out of COVID, as venues open, stadiums open up again and venues open up again, there was a real laziness in the supply industry, particularly catering services in the venues and events, who thought they found a way around it by going, well, I'm not going to use single-use plastic, but I'm going to serve aluminium cans. I'm going to serve beers and RTDs and whatever else in aluminium cans in venues. And that's probably lasted for about 1.5 years. I mean, there's a couple of people been hit by missiles again, like happened pre-COVID, why cans weren't allowed in venues. There was one in Adelaide recently during the State of Origin match where a guy was hit with a full beer can in the chest, broke a rib or two. There's been an incident at 2 incidents at the MCG, same sort of thing. But the bigger picture, aluminium's not the answer. If you have a look at carbon costs and things like that, like Nada were talking about before, the cost to manufacture an aluminium can, to actually smelter it, the energy cost, the carbon cost, and remake it again, let alone the fact that everyone thinks that an aluminium can is 100% recycled, when in reality, it's almost 30% of it comes from virgin product to manufacture aluminium. It's like a cardboard box. It's not always made from virgin product. In the case of a can, it's not. So when you weigh up a single-use plastic cup versus a beer can versus somebody, and we're not the only people in the business of reusable beer cups around the world, so I'm not suggesting every single piece of business needs to be ours, and mine's not a sales pitch. It really is just a pitch about sustainability.
And Craig,
Yeah.
just one question, if I may interrupt. What about how do you kind of position yourselves in terms of maybe getting a new client? Do you see that there's a change of how you have to position your business and how it's gonna deal with the sustainability of these events, or even as an organization to get these standards to kind of get new clients who are now mindful about these situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest change for us in the last maybe 18 months, 2 years since, say goodbye to COVID, hopefully forever, and move forward, is that we have to be somewhat more flexible in our commercial models than we first came out of the blocks with. We had an idea 5 or 6 years ago. We were pretty hard on that in terms of, if you don't fit our commercial model, that's great, go somewhere else. But then the world's changed. Like the theory at the moment is that people don't mind paying 50 cents more for a beer at a stadium if it is they're assured that the cup they're drinking out of is not going to landfill. And I think 5 years ago, that was incredibly sensitive. The price of a beer, I'm sort of under contract, so I can't talk about it too much, but one of the main stadiums we deal with in Australia, I mean, they already put 26 or 28 cents on the cost of a beer to provide a free ticket. If you hold a ticket to the event, you get public transport there for free to get on site. And no one cared about that too much. Well, that's good. With public transport, we can get to this venue. That's pretty cool. And I think it's headed that well. No, I know it's more than headed. It is already arriving in that space that people are happy to pay a little bit if it is the outcome can be guaranteed. It's the outcome that they're looking for. And then when you take that up then against carbon footprint, etc., it stands up by itself.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that kind of green premium, the ability or the willingness to accept that bit of extra is certainly something that we're seeing as well, Craig, across so many interactions. Not just in the sport or major stadium venues or events, but smaller activations certainly. And is it also talked about the interaction and the expectation from the attendee on an individual level? What about pressure from corporate or sponsors or government legislation? Is that anything you're seeing on the Incognitus end?
No, you hear a whisper of it, but if it gets down to that it might cost me something, people don't want to play. That's not totally true for everybody, right? But there's certainly, if anything, there's notional support that this has to happen. And ultimately, I think most of those sponsors are looking for someone else to wear the corporate risk, the commercial risk of that. But what's my thoughts? I think that'll change.
Great. Well, thanks, Craig. Thanks for the insight. I think we're going to have some questions for you at the end, and feel free to jump in with your opinion on any other points we're about to cover off.
Cool.
Right. Look, I'm just going to turn it now to Alfonso, who is one of our co-founders at NetNada, and he is going to be taking us through this next stage, which is essentially the emission sources and different factors associated with the event. But he'll take you through that.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Craig. And to Cesar's question, why did Incognitus pick NetNada amongst other options? I guess we can get to that at the end, but why not, Cesar? Why not? So in this part, I just want to actually give actionable insight on how can you run a sustainable event, especially in a corporate level or an event level, or from our learnings of working with event managers, event operators, and event facilities, and what leads to that. The most important thing is all of these are opportunities to engage with your attendees, engage with your sponsors, and it can be seen as another touch point to drive the positive impact that your event is having, not only in terms of sustainability, but actually engaging with your audience and making a memorable moment. So just 3 points. One is like integrating sustainability from the get-go. That might mean picking the event provider or in your procurement process to all the way to the facility. Secondly, is actually getting assessments and audits, because these numbers can be used to then engage your audience. And finally, is actually engaging your audience. And this engagement and communication can happen before the event, during, and after. So it's like a long-lasting effect that kind of overarch the whole communication. If you can go to the next slide, Alex. We have just a touch point will show this across the event to all attendees and people in the attendee list. We have a calculator online that you can like quickly use to check on the emissions of your event pre-event. So you can then use these to communicate any offsetting costs or any strategy of reduction to your attendees. Alex. So one of the big points that we see from speaking with people dealing with events, attendees, and the operators of these events is picking the right venue. And this has several impacts. One of them is how green is this venue? And it's very uncommon to have a fully operational green venue. That means a company that has good waste management practices, or a venue that has access to 100% renewable electricity, or has in place measures to increase energy efficiency, such as lighting, temperature, and so forth. The other impact of choosing a facility that has some of these points is the access to transport. And I'll touch on transport in a second, but transportation is a big contributor to the emissions of your event. So thinking ahead of time, not only where you're going to put your event in terms of pricing, but accessibility by public transports or cycling, etc. This leads you to be able to communicate pre-event that the venue that has been chosen not only thinks about the amenities and how good the event is going to be at the moment of operating and occurring, but pre-event how attendees get there. One couple certifications you can check in terms of what makes a green venue, of course, communicating with their procurement team, is checking for neighbors ratings and green star ratings on the event that you're going to choose or hire if they're part of like a larger building, as an example. As I mentioned, that the topic on sustainability and transportation, it's a big one. Think about an event that is international to Australia. People have to fly to Australia. They have to get here. They have to take an Uber to their hotel. They have to go from the hotel to your venue. That might be another Uber, or by driving, and so forth. And all of these contribute to the emissions associated with your event in terms of audience travel. So understanding what's going to be the demographics or the composition of your event is really important to then create measures or communication strategies to influence a decision maker. If it's an event only for a local audience, you might play around with accessibility. You might play around with giving discount codes to access share ride programs, or even like hiring out electric bicycles to make your event more accessible. Encouraging this alternative transport or active transport is really, really important, because it builds a really strong message from before the event and after the event, because the attendees will know that by choosing that transportation mode, they're having a positive impact. And this is something that Craig has touched on, which is at the moment you get a ticket to a stadium, and that ticket gives you a transportation method to get there, which might be the train. Right? And that's linked not only to accessibility, but to also the emissions associated with their events. And this is something that event organizers are now inherently adding to their event ticket price, as an example. Lastly, offsetting travel-related emissions. So if your event is for international audience and they have to fly in, there might be no other alternatives. So maybe just offsetting that part of the emissions of your attendees might have a long-lasting effect on the way that the attendees remember your event.
And Fonz, how is it in these massive events that we're able to understand or know how people are getting their benchmarks or surveys? Or what's the best practice here?
Yeah, the best practice to understand, one, if you have an engaged audience, is to actually ask them how they will get to the events. Secondly, you can estimate the breakdown of your attendees for if they're from local, regional, or international, and you can use city averages that might be inbuilt already into calculators, or do it yourself in terms of how you assume that they will get to the event. The other one is energy and water. Of course, energy and water, it's really depending on the venue, and this comes on the part of like the decision maker of which venue to pick. Asking yourself, can I send an extra email to check if this building is accessing renewable energies? That might not be just solar energy that they have on the rooftop, but maybe they have green power, which is, carbon neutral energy, and that will help you do a more storytelling around that impactful decision that you've made. Water is a bit more complicated, but it's about being conscious, and if there's any communication or signage in the moment of water usage in your venue that can proactively push your attendees to be more mindful of their water usage.
Yeah, and there's a lot of companies doing some really interesting stuff in this space as well, especially obviously in the energy. Working with Laneway Festival and partnering with a company called Solar Slice, but have also helped some festivals use solar panel generators for the music and other energy solutions. So there's a lot of really interesting and innovative solutions coming into this space, into the event space, that we're partnering with and connecting people to and from.
Alfonso, if I can, we're doing some work at the moment in Saudi Arabia on a project called Qiddiya, and so basically, absolute middle of the desert, bringing a suburb out of the ground, and the basis of the suburb is e-gaming, a 4,000-seat arena, a 6,000-seat arena, a 12,000-seat arena, a 35,000-seat stadium, all set in one suburb, the whole suburb all around e-gaming, 8 hotels, 2,400 beds in private accommodation space, retail, whatever it might be. And our brief was sort of written by ourselves. Our brief was like, well, how far do you want to go with this? And we're working with Cox Architecture on the project, and the client, QIC, said, well, how far can you go? I go, well, we can sit here and try to create waste utopia if you want it. And we've gone, they've said to us, okay, well, that's really interesting. What's that look like, right? So we got down the path. We're in our first, in fact, just today was our 100% deliverable of the first phase. But when we delivered 50% in, and we started talking about things like glass crushing right across the suburb will be built over the next 22 years, and that crushed glass going straight to road base, and everything with compost going straight to the garden beds on site, and using digestion for organic waste, where they've never done anything with digestion in Saudi Arabia, has been phenomenal. I mean, we're still waiting for someone to go, well, that's a bit crazy, you've gone a bit far with that. It's really interesting. And on the back of it, I guess it goes back to what we were talking about before, is what's supporting all of that? It is a want to do things right and not knowing what right is yet. It's quite bizarre, because we said utopia is probably the best word we've said right through the consultancy, was let's just create something that no one's ever done before, then we'll work out how we do it. Yeah. Getting down to things like reduction in product, like so you deliver a carcass of beef to the area, but if only 50% of the bone was ever going to be used in some other food preparation project, why doesn't it arrive on site with only 50% of the bone in it? Why isn't that somewhere else? Why isn't the packaging that everything arrives in simply taken away with reusable crates? Instead of saying fish oils are a problem, we'll go, great, let's do something with fish oils. It's amazing what we've been able to do there. And that's just all about, I guess, A, being prepared to think outside the box, and B, being given a license to do it.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, Craig, I think more maybe like in a corporate like organization space, what we're seeing is like the benefit of being that forward thinking is it's a tremendous impact, because if you are given permission by the stakeholders or the decision makers to go ahead and think outside the box, it has a long lasting impact in the way that you can position your business and the impact on the environment. But yeah, if there's any chance, then you can share that case study with us or what's happening there. It will be fantastic to chat, because it does sound very forward thinking and utopian for sure.
Yeah, happy to do that.
And to your point, that the waste management and recycling right now is just developing a clear waste management plan for your event or for your organization has a tremendous benefit. And not only that, but that kind of increases the relationship you have with maybe a venue and creates a meaningful connection and position yourself as a leader. So a good example is, how are you bringing like beverages on site? Like Craig was saying, like, whys, how are you actually getting your attendees to interact with these drinks and food? Are you serving them in like plastic containers, or are they compostable or home compostable or industrial compostable? Understanding those terms and then making your procurement process in line with your decision making can have not only like cost effective rewards, but also attendance remembering that those decisions were made. And again, this is not easy to do. It requires effort from yourself, from the organization putting up the events, but it not only upskills your staff internally, but upskills your whole audience in terms of what can be done and what is possible in terms of like waste management and recycling. So composting materials, making sure that when they are compostable, they are being diverted correctly to a composting area, making sure that you avoid any single-use plastics, making sure that you, even in the way that you prepare your catering and your meals, that you are taking into account the attendance numbers, their dietary requirements, so you have minimum waste at the end of those events. And finally is, if you can, in the same city, in the same country, try to identify those circular economy initiatives, because you might be able to hire certain material, you might be able to do some circular catering or some circular waste management where, like Craig was saying, at the end of the event, this can be reused to do something else. That kind of covers the main 5 points of the event, unless Alex, you want to add anything, which would be like the energy, the transport, the waste management, of course, like the catering process.
No, those are the main aspects. And I think it's kind of good to just, even if this is your first, divergent into event sustainability, to think about it through that prism of, okay, these are the big areas of where my emissions are going to be made through an event. Okay, what can I look across these different areas to introduce reduction strategies or to do best practices and things like that? Because sometimes people can get caught up in really minute details, where the best thing you can possibly do is encourage people to get to an event together via public transport, biking, and just making it centralized, not choosing something that's really, really far away for the sake of it, because it just can be difficult to know exactly where emissions are coming from. Our events calculator, which we'll send out after this, can also show you that breakdown of where the estimated emissions of your event are, so you can have that conversation internally and then with other stakeholders.
Perfect. And is there, we have a question from Cesar there that maybe Craig, you can try and answer, which is a bit like loaded towards NetNada, but is there any other questions towards event Craig itself, since you have the opportunity to chat with him? There's maybe some other details you can ask. If not, Craig, the Cesar's questions, and feel free to follow up with that, is why did you choose NetNada in terms of driving your sustainability agenda? Maybe you can speak more broadly about your sustainability agenda as well, Craig.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to. So we've sort of, as a company, sort of approached a T intersection really about how far do we go to ensure that we play our part, both by emotion and desire, and also via corporate strategy need, consciously go about reducing our carbon footprint and make it more than just what we're doing, with 100% effort of ensuring that we reduce as much product that we generate in events that goes to landfill, but going a whole step further. And what can we do to play our part in that? And we've embraced it as part of 2023 Go Forward. We call it our journey to net zero. We appointed an internal and external working group, if you like, or focus group, and it's been amazing. I guess we found that we're already doing things reasonably well, but there was things we could do better. There'd be things we do better, because often we're working for somebody else. So in the case of a festival, for example, we're not necessarily working with the promoter, we're often working to the stadium. But then other times we're working to the promoter because, I don't know, we're an event management company. So we might be building the event floor for Guns N' Roses, 16,000 square meters worth of floor at Accor Stadium or Marvel Stadium or whatever it might be. So what control have we got over things? Well, we as we thought through it more, we've got control over the style of materials handling equipment we'd use. Just don't go to the old diesel, petrol, gas, whatever it might be. Go find an answer. Find who's using the best product in terms of conservative fuel use or rechargeable power, or we're even looking at the moment about hydrogen potentially coming into the marketplace and in our marketplace somewhere over the next 12 to 18 months, which is really interesting. It's like, how can we control that? What can we do? And we started using, you don't realize what you're actually in control of. Like when you pack up 72 pallets worth of floor after a Guns N' Roses gig, how do you tie that? How do you tie those floor pallets down? Well, in the past, we would just use some form of plastic strapping, cut it and throw it away at the end of the gig. Now we're into reusable straps and things like that. And whilst that all sounds quite small, you know, it's actually not. Like we've got a crew of 100 workforce working, putting a floor down, and we make sure they have a breakfast, lunch, or dinner as part of their shift. What do we do to ask the provider of that to ensure that the packaging that food is provided in is sustainable and reusable or whatever it might be? We ask our crew simply to bring, we've never done this before, but please bring your, whatever you're bringing, your snacks, your fruit, your leftover Christmas cake, whatever it might be, bring it in a reusable container. Don't leave a footprint in the stadiums that we're working in. And the more you think through it, you actually think through how much more we could be in control of our own world, even if we can't control the entire world around us. And I think it's all important.
Great. Thanks for that, Craig. Really good.
Let me just add on that, Craig. I think like it's a fantastic point, and I think people underestimate, especially like larger businesses, how much they can do. A lot of things is like, you know, oh, we are unprepared. There's nothing we can change, but it's the addition of all those small things that like can make a significant contribution. And what we also believe that like sets the standard for the industry, right? If Incognito is doing that and thinking about those things, everyone else will have to start thinking, because now clients expect those solutions and those alternatives that you are putting forward.
I mean, it's a long time ago, but if you go way back to Sydney Olympic Games, right? 2000. So we were in control of the cleaning and waste for all of the 58 venues for Sydney Olympic Games, competition, non-competition. And we entered our contract in conjunction with Waste Services New South Wales and Busy Industries. And we went out saying, all right, we're going to control what we can control. And if we have to, we'll hide behind our sponsorship contract, get the answers we want. So most of the people on this call probably don't even know what some wouldn't have been alive in 2000, I should imagine. But nevertheless, pre-2000, if we went to the Golden Arches, McDonald's, and you thought about how was a Big Mac packaged pre-2000 games, or a quarter pounder packaged pre-2000 games, and they're all packaged in styrene hamburger claims. None of it was recyclable. So we stood up and said, you can't have any of that. McDonald's said, well, we're a $50 million sponsor. We'll do what we want. And we've said, well, we're a $15 million sponsor. That's our conglomerate. And sure, you can do what you want, but I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to collect as many hamburger clams that are left over in Sydney Olympic Games venues and common domain areas, and we're going to put them in one big pile, and we'll call Darren Hinch. We'll start there. If we're going to have that sort of sponsorship bash against each other, well, the outcome, it wasn't necessarily the threats, is there has not been styrene used in any McDonald's store in Australia since 1999. Now, I don't know that that's what we set out to do, but that's what we achieved. At the time, Panasonic were the television provider of the Sydney Olympic Games. 28,000 televisions were provided as part of the sponsorship contract, and all of them were packaged in styrene foam with a plastic bag over the television set and a whole lot of pieces of throwaway plastic that were made up in the packaging. By the time we got to Sydney Games, Panasonic packaged in cardboard, recyclable cardboard. So that styrene framing around the TV in the box, and the bag itself is no longer plastic, nor is it still to this day. But we didn't go out to change the world forever. We went out to change the world inside of Sydney Olympic Games. We banned shrink wrap inside of Olympic Games venues. We compromised to say to Coke, Well, if you're going to deliver your pallets in shrink wrap, I guess I can't stop you doing that, but I can stop you leaving your shrink wrap in my waste stream. So we force Coca-Cola and others to put red bins inside of venues where they delivered pallets with shrink wrap, unwrap their pallets and take their packaging away. So it didn't fix the problem of the footprint of shrink wrap plastic in Sydney, but it certainly fixed the problem of shrink wrap plastic inside of Olympic venues in the Sydney Olympic Games. They're great outcomes.
Thanks. Yeah. Inspiring for sure. And that's what we're kind of looking for with everyone that kind of join us on this sustainability journey. Alex, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, we just had one more question come through, which I think just tied in there nicely. Craig, you've obviously been involved in the sustainable side of events for 20 plus, even further than that, going back to the Atlanta Games. But for someone who's just trying to get started, whether it's their company offering sustainable events or any area of event sustainability, like what would be your recommendation there? This question's come through from Charlie Green.
Two of my favourite sayings, thanks Charlie. Two of my favourite sayings are that every day is a school day and you pay to learn. I think it costs no more to do things right than wrong. I think it costs us all, particularly when there's labour involved and the cost of labour, increasing cost of labour. I think that if you plan something, you get it wrong and you got to go fix it, it's going to cost a lot of money. But if you put on take the hat we're wearing, this Waste Utopia hat in Saudi Arabia, if you take an approach to go, I'm going to really try to make a difference in my planning of this event, and then look through the lens of, is what I'm doing costing me or my client any more money? And if it is it a dramatic amount of money? Or is it something that the client is going to wear some of the cost of that simply to make sure that they get it right? And then I think as part of that, you've got to tell their story, not just your own story. So how do you get them to the table, get them involved in the way you want to think in a utopian sense about planning for your sustainable event, and then tell them what the rewards for them is going to be. Lead them to the trough.
Great.
Like we're working on a gig at the moment for a renewable energies company, wind and hydrogen. Basically, we're working on a conference, and there's a couple of things. We're doing some really clever things in terms of what are their giveaways on the stand. Their tote bag is a recycled vinyl sign that's made by cottage industry in Melbourne, where instead of throwing away those vinyl signs after they come down and whatever, and then add to them the straps on them are seat belts from wrecked cars. So they're 100% like you reuse product from somewhere, and we're putting, cornstarch frisbees and all sorts of cool things like that. And all of them can clearly see what we're doing about reducing their footprint into the society of the people that are attending these conferences. But if we're going even a little bit further, like we've gone to a seed farm group and we'll give away 30,000 Banksia tree seeds as part of what we're doing in these two conferences. Now, I can't prove, and nor can they prove, they ever got planted or they didn't get thrown out. You'd only hope that they didn't. And sometimes it's just about putting it out there as a hope, not necessarily having the entire result. For the story they get from it, if they want to tell that story, is massive.
Craig, just one more question that was actually sent to me directly, which is from Jessica. Jessica, I'll just relay the message to Craig. Is in the UK, they have an event industry body called ISLA. Is there an equivalent in Australia or APAC region? Yeah,
there's a few actually. I'll send them through to you guys, and you guys can distribute them to your audience. I mean, the first one to go look at would be the Venue Management Association, the VMA, which isn't about events, but it certainly is about venues. And because it's about venues, it's about the events in those venues, even though the venues don't control the events. They're just, I think we forget about this too, right? Venues are, venue managers are real estate agents. They rent boxes and other people come and put on the show. And quite often, a bit like renting a house, you don't totally get to control what the tenant's doing. But increasingly inside of venues are being stronger and firmer to the promoters that are going to play in their venues. And as I said before, so are many of the acts. So Venue Management Association is a good place to look. The International Association of Venue Managers, IAVM, is another decent place to have a look. There's the International Events Association. I'll send you through a few to look at.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Jessica, feel free to, if you have any follow-up questions on that. We have also another question from Dylan, which is, do you have any suggestions to help deal with food waste in events such as large weddings, group dinners, and conferences? Craig, feel free to answer that, and I can jump in afterwards.
Did you say Lane Waste Festival? Is that one of them?
No, large weddings, group dinners, or conferences.
Oh, right.
Dealing with food waste.
A lot of it gets around, firstly go right back to the source. How's the product coming to the venue to go in the kitchen to be made into something? If you're allowed to come in waxed cardboard boxes or plastic boxes, then go back to the source. Tell the venue, if you're going to bring your wedding there, they better show you that there's a way to actually control the waste stream that's coming inside of the venues. And then to look at, lots of weddings, lots of events, there's a whole lot of useless giveaways that most people don't normally take away anyway. Start thinking about what you could do differently. What if you had I know this will sound silly, and a lot of people who know me well, if I said this 10 years ago, they'd say, I don't believe you're saying this. So what if you had a tree planting ceremony at the festival, at the wedding? You said, everyone pick up a tree and go and plant it. Just go plant it in the garden and out in this beautiful venue or whatever it might be. There's lots of ways to do it, as long as you think outside the box a bit. Certainly, there's enough easy, cheap digestion technology around now to ensure that any food waste from a plate scrape or preparation in the kitchen just doesn't find its way to landfill.
Yeah. And to that point, I think that activation of what makes a good gift or event at the venue is really important, specifically to waste. And what I had to say as well is, and we're working with a couple of convention centers doing this, is one is that menu preparation. How much involvement can you have, and what are the things that are going into preparing those meals? And if they're going to be prepared on site, is thinking about things not only how they get to events and places, but how do they get out, right? So what is the waste management process after the event has finished? And just might be as simple as adding an extra bin to put your organics. Sometimes venues don't have that, or the event organizer doesn't think about adding just one extra stream where just organics go in, and you can take that, the contractor will take it away, and it's going to be composted. So it's just those little details that can add together. So making sure there's a waste stream for organics, making sure that the meal preparation and how it gets there, that the remainings can actually be disposed of, and trying to avoid any mixed material. For example, if things are coming in cardboards plus plastic together, might just be better to ask for a full cardboard or even fully plastic thing, so it can it can be recycled.
Sure.
And Dylan, thank you so much, but feel free to follow through via email, and happy to answer any questions. Go ahead, Alex.
I think there's no other questions, just as a bit of a summary, some additional resources that will be coming everyone's way. We will have a link to our event calculator, recording of the webinar, and then a bit more of just an information pack about NetNada and how we help with events and as a whole for organizations. So I think we're on pretty good timing now. If there's any other questions, otherwise we can just call it there, and we'll send through the recording to everyone. But thanks everyone for coming. Thanks very much, Craig, for very, very insightful, obviously so much experience in this space. So it was very, very good to hear from you. Thanks for coming along.
Cheers, mate. I've just sent you through a link to another similar thing like this training session by a company called Momentous Technologies out of the USA. They're basically a tech company, but they've recently aggregated up through a series of VC investors, aggregated up a series of tech companies all in the event space. 2 or 3 of them actually come from Australia. And it's funny what they've learned on the way through, that they just can't be a tech company, and they've got to have a growth in a sustainable bent to be the international company that they want to become. They got a training session webinar on the, I think it's the 2nd or 3rd or 4th of September. So feel free to distribute that to anyone you want. It's a free seminar for anybody.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Craig. Yeah, those kind of resources and insights across the industry, they're exactly the types of things you want to be sharing. But look, thanks everyone for coming along. Fonzie, do you have anything else to add?
No, perfect. Thank you so much.
Great, no worries. I will speak to everyone soon, and thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.